Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 17 of the Simpa Life Podcast with me, Simpa Carter. I am joined as always by Mr. Maka. How are you today, brother?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much. Back over to you. Didn't fuck it up. Nice one.
That was concise. I wasn't expecting that. Right, we've got a couple of seconds to kill you. So, what we're going to do? But we'll introduce our guest. So the guest that we have today is Cefyn Jones. He's the former CTA member's point of contact. He is the founder of the Hemp Hound Agency. And he's also a founder and producer at Lovebud, formerly a CBD company, currently in reform, which you'll hear about shortly. Without further ado, I shall throw you over to Cefyn himself to give you a bit of better idea of who he is and what he's doing.
Hello. Yes, my name's Cefyn Jones, and I've been in the industry for quite some time. Obviously, I think everyone has a past before that, but certainly when it comes to CBD, hemp, and the likes of, I've been in the game for over 5 years, pretty much. Me and my wife decided that we were going to look into that area. We created a little company called Lovebud, and then I ended up working for my ex-employer. Had a couple of awesome years there where I was able to help a load of brand new companies, existing and established companies, help them connect and kind of build up their kind of business interests. Then recently I left my former employee, and it was kind of like, well, what do I do? You know, I had knowledge before, and, you know, I had a little bit more drive. So it was a case of create the Hemp Hound Agency, where I was able to work with less companies because my past employer, obviously, there was a lot of members there. But one of the things that I always wanted to be was a little bit more hands-on. So when Hemp Hound became an opportunity, that was one of the things that I really wanted to embrace, because let's be honest, you know, regardless of what facet of the cannabis world you're in or you embrace, it's always known for being, you know, a little bit more togethery, a little bit more socially focused. And that shouldn't really kind of just be restricted to what you stick in Rizla, if you kind of understand my drift. So yeah, that's where Hemp Hound comes in. It's a purely advisory agency, and it's all about contact building as well. You know, I want my clients to be able to work together for the greater good, as well as to help build a directory which will help be a one-stop shop, you know, the green pages of the hemp and CBD world.
I like that, the green pages. Yeah.
But I didn't call it that because I think someone got it already.
Damn it. Well, whatever you end up terming it, it definitely needs, if it's physical, needs to be printed on cannabis, that's for sure.
Oh, yes.
So that was a really concise, sort of great introduction there. I've got sort of a few loose questions and subjects, as I said, that I would like to cover as we go on. But I think something that I'd really want to cover immediately, because obviously we'll be putting this podcast out very soon, so that people want to get an idea of what's going on at the minute. So you're currently in a battle with the Home Office over a Freedom of Information request. Could you possibly inform of our listeners a bit more about what's going on with that?
Absolutely. So for over a year now, I've been engaged in a Freedom of Information request with the Home Office. Now, it's a little bit of a question that most people wouldn't ordinarily think of. And it comes back to 2018, where it was publicized that there was potential conflict of interest with two very high up people, namely Theresa May and Victoria Akins. Now, Victoria Akins, she recused herself from questioning, and that's a bit of an interesting thing, you know. From my understanding, you can only really do that in the judiciary. I know she is a member of the bar, but of course you've got to kind of wonder where your kind of MP hat finishes and your judiciary hat begins, you know. So basically, because she recused herself, I thought, well, if you're removing yourself from questioning or actions on cannabis, let's test the water on that. Now, just after all of that came out, the World Health Organization released its recommendation for the reclassification of cannabis. Now, I thought if she had a hand in that, then there is the potential for reinforcement of that conflict of interests, because she admitted in her recusal that it was down to the fact of her husband's position that she was recusing herself. So in that, she's literally admitting straight away that there is a conflict of interests. But apparently, according to Ronnie McCowan MP, who was the guy who actually filmed it, she was okayed for her recusal by the Home Office. Right. And apparently, according to other sources I won't mention, basically, she did kind of declare her interests when she was accepted as the Parliamentary Undersecretary for State. Right. But if that's the case, then I need to see for my own eyes, and I believe for the cannabis community, that she hasn't gone further. Right. And by further, I mean influencing guidelines that would have been carried forwards to their policy and addressing of the 63rd UN CND, the UN's conference on narcotics drugs. Now, I've been, like I said, for a whole year been battling this, and the very first reply I had was, "It's not in the public interest to know." Right, and this.
Can I ask? What was the question that you actually asked?
Can I please have all documents and files relating to any policy for the 63rd UN CND? Can I also have documents including people from Theresa May, Victoria Aikins? I also put Sajid Javid in there, Priti Patel, and I also mentioned the civil servants that were all part of that.
Right. Interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, basically it was originally turned down on the basis of the public interest, which I believe I argued adequately at the time, to which then it got taken to an independent internal review where it was turned over. But then they turned around and said, "Oh, we're going to introduce the costs." Now, apparently in an FOI, you're only allowed to allocate, I think it's 25 hours and or £600. Right, per question, right? So they said it was cost. But I then went to the Information Commissioner's office, who then overturned that very recently, to which the Home Office were forced to reply again. But strangely, they came back with the conflict of interests, despite the fact that that had already been overturned.
So they're just putting you back through the runner again.
It's either that or someone hasn't really checked the case file. You know, if they've just thought, oh, right, okay, then we can't go on costs, then we'll just throw a generic kind of reply at him. And because it's been going on for over a year, I think that's still highly possible. I think someone's just basically read what the ICO have said the Home Office needs to do, and they've decided to go that tact. And I do have a follow-up with them where I have asked if the person has read my file and been able to identify the fact that public interest has already been kind of addressed a year ago.
Interesting. If it is then the continuation of the same case, the sort of the independent tribunal services or somebody like that, being a public body, could investigate this. So it could then, is that a route that you're potentially looking at to,
yes.
to kind of take it away from that?
Yes, I talked to the ICO about this today, and normally what they would say is you have to go through an independent internal review of every decision. But they have actually looked at this and said, no, there's something not right. And they have agreed that should I not get a reply from the Home Office from my last question, that basically I should just refer the case directly to them, foregoing the next internal review, and they will deal with it adequately.
Interesting, because again, there are some successes coming. I'm thinking of a story that I wrote in one of the last week in weed blogs that I've released on the simpalife.com, which was about a guy who lost his job in the UK working at a recycling center. He was a driver's mate, and he failed a cannabis drug test, and his employer sacked him. He took the employer to an independent employment tribunal, so to the tribunal services, and the judge agreed. They said that you sacked him entirely because cannabis was illegal. You didn't inquire about why he uses it. You didn't inquire about how it affected his work. You've shown records that said he was unaffected by it in terms of his performance. You, up until that point, considered him a good employee. And so, yeah, I think that going it that sort of way, and I think the question that you've asked it is quite unique. As you've said, it's something that very few people, myself included, would have actually thought of doing, because there is a form of, I guess you could call it, cohesion between the governments and the UN and the World Health Organization when it comes to correlation of information around drugs. It's often very skewed and specific data they want to extrapolate and massage to fit whatever it is that government's agenda may be.
I think you're right. One of the sections on this reply to the FOI was that they can't give information. And it's funny reading it. It blatantly kind of suggests that they're more interested in their own interests than that of the public. But one of the things in there was that they cannot talk about something that could potentially jeopardize the relations with another state. Right now, that says that basically before the meeting last year, all of the governments somehow kind of had conversations between each other on how they're going to approach the World Health Organization's recommendations. Now, that is kind of going against the public interest because, as you've seen with the Canavape case just before, CBD was ruled as not in the spirit of the first UNCND because of its health and well-being implications. If that's the case, and of course you had the UN meeting passed there where they accept that there's medicinal value, even though they didn't really take more steps that I was kind of hoping. There is that one question. Right? Why are we prohibiting something that's not just medicinal, but it's also supplemental? It just doesn't make sense. And if they've been proven by two world governing bodies, we've got to ask the question: what's holding back? Why are we as a country paying money into the World Health Organization for them to give us recommendations for us to not accept them? It just seems absurd.
Well, it reminds me of the situation with David Nutt at the Advisory Council of the Misuse of Drugs. A lot of these bodies, they come back with a decision and then it's the governments figure out a way to obfuscate that advice. They find a way to not implement it or to skirt around to the bare minimum just to continue a perpetuation. And I think you hit on a point there exactly. If it's not in the public interest, what interest is it in? And I think it's quite true that we can see that what's happening with drugs now is they've gone from a let's have a zero drugs world, full war. They've now found that there's profitable parts of prohibition, and they're now working out how to separate them from the evils of it in terms of the institutional racism, class inequality, wealth inequality, etc. And they're going to profitize that. And we're seeing that with it's got the medicinalization of entheogenic substances. We're seeing that with cannabis, with what they're doing in the corporate world of it. So still today, sat in the UK, it's illegal for you or I to cultivate it. It's illegal for me to possess this. Obviously, it's not illegal for me to consume it, but just to have this.
Sorry, it just looks like a pen from here.
It is. I'm quite happy. Yeah. But the point still stands that if I had a magic piece of paper, I'm fine. So then it's what does that piece of paper serve? It's not about then giving me clemency and allowing me the opportunity to use this therapeutic tool. It's about continuing or creating a new cartel. So basically what we're going to see is what HBOS and all these other big, huge banks that have been laundering tens of billions for all of this cash for the illegal market, that's just going to go into the legal market. It's going to go into stocks and futures and indexes. This is where all of that money is going, and it's not going to help our communities. So rather than it being the dealers and whatever else, at least their money gets spent in our country. At least the majority of it gets spent in our streets. So it goes back into the shops, back into people's pockets. Whereas when the governments and these huge cartels control it, they are going to asset strip us. We're going to be more impoverished and worse off. And I think that exactly the tact you've taken here, same as like Seed Our Future and We the Undersigned, is that we have a right to this. If the corporations have a right to it, we the people have a right to it too.
From every attack, just to be sort of brief as well, is they're implementing the same sort of tactic, isn't it? It's sort of knowing exactly what to say to bide more time, to actually not to stagnate any sort of progression whatsoever, and delay, just to make it more costly overall in terms of time, in terms of actual financial, from a financial context. It's how long can that fucking hold out? There has to be a breaking point. There has to be.
There has to be. I noticed this with petitions. I'm up there with trying to get the good herb legalized, but I think everyone goes through a rite of passage where it's like, weed, legalize it. We'll do a petition. Hold on, why is only 500 people signed this? That'll be because so many people have realized that those petitions don't work because there's literally a copy and paste reply. Mm-hmm. And that is tragic because although the questions varied, it's still the same question. All right. And to me, it was like, well, hold on. we need to ask something where that copy and paste doesn't apply. It's the same with Phil Monk. Hold on, let's talk about we the undersigned and the human right to access, or let's talk about Seed Our Future, with their search for proof to define cannabis as a Schedule 1 drug. Those aren't asking the same question, right? And that's where, I'd like to think that we can all get together, kind of literally launch the absolute assault, right? And get politicians to either admit their interests, and if there's no interest to admit, then admit at least that they've been lying for us as long as they have.
The secondary one is problematic, because if you're going to do that, it's going to have it's not, I don't know, it's not treason, but it's along those fucking lines. It's fraudulent, surely, right? It must be.
It comes back to what we said before about public interest, their interest. So you see this all the time from government ministers, and they'll stand there and they go, we need to protect our economy. They ain't talking about ours. They ain't talking about the Islam out here. They're not talking about us. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So they have interests in everything, and they don't even realize it. You've got to remember, most of the pension pot for MPs is in, still currently, tobacco and armaments. We're still the second biggest arms dealer on the planet. Do you know what I mean? Brexit's fucked everything, but we're still shotting those guns, baby. We're still murdering kids and women in Yemen via Saudi through our trade deals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous point. So they can't see that. Whereas you can actually pitch the argument that cannabis, that's an interest against cannabis, because cannabis is a resource. If you look at it, say bioethanol, 5 times cleaner than diesel, will run on the vast majority of engines we have today. We don't need wars in foreign countries to secure oil. If you then look at it for medically, we then don't need to secure regions like Afghanistan to protect opioid crops, poppy crops anymore, because we look at the medical world is moving away from opioid pharmaceuticals and looking to bio and synthetic cannabinoids to treat the same things. I think that as those things sort of go, it's naturally already changing their interests into corporatizing the legalization of cannabis. Do you know what I mean? So giving the people the power it's never going to be in their interest to do so. And I think that even if we replace the people in power, it's still not going to be, because cannabis can't really be commodified in the same way. Do you know what I mean? It's so diverse.
Sure about that?
Well, they're obviously working on it, but I mean, you can't full spectrum commodify it, right? So you couldn't allow a free market to go, there's the plant, and allow everything to exist, because it would decimate oil, it would decimate plastics, it would, you know what I mean? If the big companies put their money into research and development and truly understood plant-based polymers, we'd be in a fucking different position. Do you know what I mean? Same with renewables, graphene, cannabis-based graphene. That is the big game changer, because quantum computing, supercell capacitor batteries, etc. You know what I mean? That it would destroy so much. It would eradicate the stock market. Would have to change overnight. So they're inking it out bit by bit. But at each point,
that's happening though.
To get the profitability of it.
I do believe that.
I'm still here.
Sorry. The fourth industrial revolution, the green revolution. That's happening. I'm pretty certain. And certainly the one plant I believe that can help us out in that is cannabis. Now, over on the other side of the pond recently, I believe it's Detroit, have actually allowed hemp planting in inner cities, right, for 30,000 acres to clean up brownfield sites. Right. Now, that is seriously forward thinking.
Yeah, I'm down with
right.
that.
I mean, the amount of jobs as well. They reckon it create 35,000 jobs, clean up the land. Brilliant. Now that is embracing it as a commodity, right? Recognizing its phyto remediation qualities in that sense is awesome. The fact that it's used to clean up land around Chernobyl just shows how powerful a plant it is before we even start considering it as a food or a medicine.
Well, let's hope then, because Detroit has obviously got an incredibly high homeless population. So let's hope that they then choose to build some homes out of the excess of this.
Yeah, I was going to
ask. I mean, if it's then it needs the need. It's all well and good for these individual projects. What I was trying to say before, crudely, I'll admit, in retrospect, was that they can't come out, like say, they can't commodify everything at once, because the way it would do it would be cause such irreparable change. They can have these projects, but they need to be in some way vertically integrated or in some way connected together to understand how one affects the other. Because I've been to farms in America that grow cannabis flowers that waste thousands of tons of fibrous material. Do you know what I mean? Then you've got cannabis that's put in plastic packaging and shit like this. Just, it's not quite in the same way. And I'm stuck in the juxtaposition between how do we get there if it would then collapse. The creation of the new economy means the death of the current. And that's okay. And that's okay to us on the bottom, but those that are invested billions in this infrastructure, they're the ones who are not letting this happen. So they'll allow the vast majority of the population to fall into ruin, economically, environmentally, ecologically. It's because they'll still have profit. They'll still be able to trade it on the stock market. So until it's truly given to the people for us to just go, let's go with it. I mean, there's France today have just announced, the government have just come out and said that we want to introduce new guidelines for hemp within the country. They want to sell smokable flowers. They want to have a full industry within country, raise the THC limit to 0.6. And they said that the current guidelines are completely grotesque, and they want to incentivize farmers to research, to interbreed, to play around with the genetics. They're not trying to lock them down like the rest of the world's going, so they can create crude term again, terminator seeds or single cycle seeds to then have to sell to farmers to get limited cannabinoid spectrum, while then creating lab stuff that solves all of the medical issues. Yeah. And then eradicating street cannabis in the middle. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, the commodification, probably the wrong word. But I mean, it seems, the concern that we have is obviously dependent on the application of the architecture or the setting up of the architecture. Do you know what I mean? Whether that falls under some sort of capitalist. I'm on the fucking capitalism again. But yeah, you see my point. You see, like, what you're saying there, Simpa, is you give everybody the freedom to do it and commodify it and then feed all of that fucking back in so that it reinforces the community.
Do from the bottom up, not from the top down.
Yeah, all fucking day.
Simpa for president. Yeah, that works. You say commodification, and if it isn't a bona fide word, then never mind. We'll run with it. Whereas France are being quite open, the UK is being more restrictive, and more so is that evident in regards to the CBD world. Now, I've had a little look, and it's scary. If you type in GW Pharma patents, you get 7 pages, all right? And on each page, there's 20 patents, all right? Now, I've had a little look on there, and they've got patents stretching back to 2003, 2005, and 2008 for CBD products. Right, that's well before 2016, when the MHRA tried to create a purely medicinal compound in CBD through consultation. And in fact, that was the point when my previous employer actually formed, and them, as well as a few industry specialists, actually won the right for a CBD supplemental market. Now, with what's happening, we're basically being denied the whole plant. Is getting to a point of single cannabinoid products. In March this year, you might see broad spectrum and full spectrum ingestible products, but they are the ones that are going to struggle most to get through this novel food barrier. It's all going to be isolate based products. And to me, that feels like, all right, we dropped the ball with CBD. You can have that one, right? But you're not having any other cannabinoids. Right, and that's kind of evident with some of the people that I've talked to. You ask the veterinary medicines doctorate, for example. Are you taking your opinion on cannabinoid-based supplemental products for pets from the Home Office or from recognised industry specialists, veterinary studies, and the likes of? They can't answer the question. At the end of the day, what they can do is provide me with an FOI that shows that basically it's like, can we do this? Home Office is like, nah, it's got THC in, it's got this in. You can't do that. So I think, the VMD in themselves kind of just literally annihilated that kind of product range. And you see with the Food Standards Agency as well, 2017, they were originally approached by the Home Office to get all cannabinoids placed as novel. Now, it turns out that the then head of novel foods, I think Guy might have talked to you about this, or Guy Coxall from Seed Our Future, but certainly that person was then demoted inside of the Food Standards Agency because she didn't believe that whole plant extracts and products were novel. So she gets demoted. A more kind of, shall we say, authoritarian team come in. And, all of a sudden we've got people around the world talking about the UN's recommendations. You've got the EU almost classifying it as a narcotic. You've got absolute craziness out there. And I think what I'm trying to get at is all of this needs to stop. I mean, it's a plant, it's not processed opioids, it's not all any of that, and when it comes to the commodification, that's where we are kind of at the moment. If it does become a commodity, then that market's broken anyway. It does mean that there's going to be restructuring, but if it breaks and we are subject to the green economy, then, hopefully very soon I can get a hempcrete shed office down in my garden, and hopefully we could all have the right to grow at home, and not have to hide around corners, to just enjoy the good herb.
Yeah. You touched on a lot of points there from, again, to keep sources protected, a few people that I know, influential individuals. As far as I'm aware, there is not a single application that has gone through for validation through to the FSA that is anything other than a distillate or an isolate product. So everything from the first that is broad or full has any trace of THC. And if Kit, I can't remember the guy's name.
Malthouse.
If that, Malthouse. If he gets his way and they reduce it down to the minimum, I think they wanted 0.0001, which is nearly impossible to produce if you go from a plant derivative. They're making it so difficult that you can do it, but the cost of it means that what they're doing is incentivizing a handful of white labelers to own the industry. So you everything you spoke of, it speaks to greed. And the main one is, to me, is look 5 years from now, cannabinoids, phytocannabinoids as medicines won't exist. They just won't. They are too difficult to have to produce. You have to actually cultivate them, employ people to do whatever. If you can then produce yeast en masse and then convert that into a bunch of cannabinoids or various other biosyntheses, which is what a lot of these companies are really fucking working on. So my conspiracy, if I had my tinfoil hat for the moment, would be that all of these clinics and everything that's selling flower around the world, all of these outlets are experiments. They're accruing information and data as patients build their own forums and go, these strains are cultivars, these profiles, these products help. All of that data then goes back into the pharmaceutical companies that can create better, more bespoke products targeted for each of the conditions. Once they've got a spectrum of products for every condition, they then just basically turn off the traditional pharmaceutical world, and there's your medical model, while limiting the recreational to the consumer. So we can get products, but nowhere near as much. We'll never get a recreational product with high THCV, for example. They'll never give us other minor cannabinoid expression. They'll go, you can have your THC and you have to have your bit of CBD for balance to make it antipsychotic in their current understanding of their literature as it's pressed at the minute. And the rest of it will be weaponized against us. You're already seeing this. It's not just GW. It's the doctors that work for these organizations as well are privately patenting these. The numbers are astronomical. And you think it's bad in the West. China are fucking killing it, especially on applied technologies. You think we're going all right with a little bit of graphene research, and we've got like Robert Murray Smith playing around with stuff, and we've got like the Graphene Institute in the north, and there's a few Canadians pissing around with it. China owns half the world's patents on graphene applied technologies. As soon as they figure out a way to mass produce from fibrous cannabis while then being able to effectively reduce their environmental disaster, the same as the rest of us. And Mackie, you said, when does it stop? It stops when there's that tipping point, when the economics of prohibition versus survival cross. When they see that crossover, that's when they switch.
I think that's going to be a lot closer than you might think. Yeah. I mean, it is a case of line big pharma's pockets, but how are you going to do that if you've got a post-COVID economy that's struggling? No one's going to be able to afford a medicinal cannabis prescription. Then it's just going to lead to the expansion of the black market. And then where does it end? Do you just say, right, okay, we see what's happening, we see the cash flow, we see what's happened over on the other side of the pond, we're going to embrace that, but then there's going to be that fight back from Big Pharma. But at the same time, who would win? I've been thinking about this in the last couple of days, and I don't think it's all going to be Big Pharma's way. Or maybe that's wishful thinking, but at least there's a kind of definite balance right now that is so fragile that it could tip either way.
Well, I think what you're going to see is a fracturization of the CBD industry as people, because look, the other thing in this is vape product CBD are not in the remit of the FSA right now. They're currently still under loose legislation from the vape tobacco vaporization. So they're killing it as a market. They're going to go quite up with this and enjoy this, while everyone then goes down again. It's going to be, all the brands are then going to have to sack off their suppliers, buy from effectively the ACI's white labelers, and that's how they're going to operate and be allowed to operate and continue, while then trading standards butchers anybody else who dares sell anything else. But the wonderful thing of that pushes everybody else that looked at THC and as recreational users, as druggies, all into the same boat. So the further they specify this, the more nuanced they make it. And when they switch over to synthetics, that means everybody else that believes in the plant is suddenly back in the same boat with the rest of us. So it's actually, it's a scary time as the monolith gets larger, but at the same time, it's the top of the pyramid. So there's more of us. The bigger it builds, the more of us there are by design. So that, again, that tipping point will come where we just go, well, fuck you. And we just build a cannabis union, a true cannabis union that represents every industry and every possible application other than biosynthetic pharmaceutical drugs, which should be scheduled. They should be under schedule, because look at what they did with gabapentin and shit like that. They're dangerous fucking drugs that are destroying lives on the street now. You look at what they did with Oxycontin. You know what I mean? We don't want them to be the gatekeepers to this. So they can do that for very specific targeted medications, which again needs to exist, and there is a place for that. But at the same time, for somebody who's just got a little bit of anxiety, they should be allowed to just grow a plant, because even the joy of growing that plant, nurturing it and whatever else, that's healing. That's the thing that's missing. Then just going to a doctor and some guy, some gentrified bloke, he's sitting there, doesn't even know what he's talking about, because we'll sign you this and we'll give you this. You're going to be more anxious than ever. You don't know what it is. He's not giving you anything. And I'm not then saying at the same time, go to a dealer and Dave be like, why it's this and it does that. There should be a spectrum of access. There should be an incentivization on education, not on creating pathways to profit, which is what I feel the weaponization of medical versus recreational has done.
I think you're spot on there, but you also might want to include an embracing of the term anecdotal evidence. I actually had an interview with Professor Mike Barnes about a year and a half ago, and it was to do with how the medical establishment were using anecdotal evidence as an excuse for not prescribing. The thing is, I mean, I'm not quite certain how many cannabinoids, endocannabinoids we have. Is it more than 7, 9? And if you have 7 or 9 dice, how many computations have you got there of what you can throw? Like, it's a bit mad. So with anecdotal evidence, it's arguable to kind of state that is reflective of the uniqueness of everyone's endocannabinoid system. So certainly when you're saying spectrum of products there to try, I think that is more so valid than anything else. I mean, from a personal standpoint, when I, shall we say, was a little less legal than I am now, certainly I used to grow for people with conditions. And I noticed this one lass who basically, I switched from triple P to lemon haze. and won't mention her condition, but I did notice that basically she stopped coming to see me, and it couldn't have been that my jokes were terrible. I'm pretty certain that it was basically that lemon haze wasn't touching her, whereas the triple BP beforehand was really hitting the spot. And she did have a condition where hitting the spot was just kind of allowing her to kind of function on a day-to-day basis. So in that sense, complexity of weed is amazing, as is the complexity of our own endocannabinoid systems in that.
Yeah, but so I worry about intellectual property, for example. So the reason, say, a lot of these clinics are saying Red 42, they're not calling it what the cultivar is. They clearly look at Sativex, man. Sativex is skunk number one. That is a street cultivar. They bought it up. Was it Sam the Skunk Man was the guy that originally partnered with Jeffrey Guy, and they went off and went through with it, and that was what created Sativex. And then since then, these companies have accrued street genetics. That's what they're also doing. There's a narrative that I need to follow up that somebody put me onto. This is, again, a hot take, I suppose, right now. I can't fully evidence this, but the Leicester University are in partnership with the police to catalogue the strains that they're finding in the raids.
Interesting.
Do you know what? There's something I've thought about here, right? Can the police absolutely guarantee that every single bit of seized cannabis is getting burnt? Because I wouldn't be surprised, and this is purely opinion, right, that they've got someone going around saying, "Ooh, that looks nice. We'll take that to the lab and add that to the stock." If you can't get my drift, because I mean, you see all these bust posts from the police. I mean, it's been insane since COVID has kicked off, the level there. And I've actually kind of tried to call the cops out on this. Can you guarantee that all of those products and bud is incinerated? I think that might be one of my next FOIs.
Good fucking luck. You said your battle with the Home Office. I'm still in how long are we now? 4-month battle with all of the constabularies around the UK. They're still every now getting a little bit back and forth, but the majority of them coming back with Section 14, which says basically that I'm being difficult. There's a very posh legal term for it that says that you are being difficult. I'm deliberately trying to waste their time.
Yeah.
Look at the reasons. There's a whole list of why they can reject you now for freedom. Well, I think it's actually an old list. It came with the act, but now they really enforce it.
Can they prove it?
The other one is, as you say, if it takes more than so much time, or that if it accrues a certain cost.
Yeah.
Some of them were brilliant. Some came straight back and went, "Here you go," and understood. Others were like, "We don't understand the nature of your question," and we're bouncing back and through. And so there's quite a few of them I'm still going with. And yeah, they're very shifty on this. I mean, this is something we discussed offline before. There was the piece in The Guardian recently, which was discussing basically a government department that is advising all of these sort of public institutions how to obfuscate their responsibility on freedom of information requests and deny the public the information they need to know what the hell is going on, because the media sure as hell ain't going to tell us.
And that's tied in directly with the Cabinet Office, if I believe is correct. Also, another person who's got an FOI in from me, but maybe you keep that one for a different show.
Yeah. But again, if anyone listening, this is the way to do it. Everybody has the power to put in freedom of information request. There's only a few criteria I think you actually need to put it. What is it? Full name, contact address, a clear question of what it is. And yeah, boom, set yourself off. And you can request basically anything within certain reason and logic, I suppose. They obviously, like I say, have the right to refuse it based on a few of these things. But if it's actually something that they wouldn't deem too sinister, they're not really going to block you. So you can actually get some really quite useful information. And I think a lot of people have been doing that during COVID to try and figure out what is going on in their local regions without getting too conspiratorial.
I wonder. I was wondering, since they're quite clearly adapting to more complicated freedom of information requests, and obviously learning of different ways, more effective ways to bounce it back, are we doing anything to reciprocate that? Is there anybody collecting all of the responses and kind of going like a chess game and going, well, how do we respond to these fucking responses? That kind of way?
Bombard them.
Yeah, but I mean, you can bombard them, but if they can get away with how they handle, say, petitions, like we talked about, which is the same copy and paste thing to say that you answered the question. Technically, you answered the question, even though you fucking didn't answer the fucking question.
You change the wording very slightly. You just restructure the sentence so you get everyone to go, this is the base sentence, here's the 45 variables.
Yeah.
Go.
I mean, but conceptually, then you're looking to overwhelm the system rather than figure out how the fuck it works.
Well, no, sorry, cutting a second. In my approach there would be to get them to just kind of go, fuck it, just give them it.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I didn't think of that.
I think there's two options here, really. I mean, you do have the Information Commissioner's Office. Now, admittedly, since COVID, they've told me that they are working at a backlog, but they are good and they are quite effective, which is awesome. And then, of course, you do have the option to scream and shout. I mean, in regards to mine, they've admitted that they've got evidence. And they won't share it, and it's based on the public interest, which we can argue against. Also, that if they tell us what's been going on behind closed doors, it might upset other states. I mean, to me, trying to say that is weird, because surely the health and safety of your citizens who you're supposed to represent is far more important than pissing off Luxembourg or whoever.
Which states are you worried about?
So as a potential, or as somebody who is, I suppose, labeled a conspiracy theorist, or thinking along those lines, could it not be to then something that the government, as we know, when Theresa May, for example, was Prime Minister, she had these conflicts of interest? Could it not then be that decisions were made during her premiership that they really don't want other governments to know about?
There is a part in the Ministerial Code of Conduct that states that any investigation is either okayed or dismissed by the then sitting Prime Minister. And that Prime Minister has ultimate power. Mm-hmm. All right? Which is a bit weird, because I can't find anything. Well, I haven't found anything yet that kind of says that there is a higher power that you can bring these cases to. Because, at the end of the day, do we elect a prime minister to serve us, or do we elect a prime minister to become a temporary dictator? Because that's pretty much where it is. If they're not answerable to anyone, then they can get away with things like kind of dismissing investigations into their own potential conflicts, or protecting someone who has got a blatant conflict that's been reported about in mainstream media. Those bits and pieces, and that's weird as hell. Right. I mean, I sent you that document earlier, and I kind of pointed out that I can see exactly where they're in breach of multiple points of the ministerial code. Right. Mm. Why is it not being investigated then? Well, apparently it's not legally binding, although it's supposed to be treated as such. Mm. And you have that ultimate authority, who ultimately was one person who had a finger pointed.
Well.
What do you do? I mean, what do you do?
Yeah, that's when you got to shout about it. And certainly I'm in a position now, because I've gone around in that circle where I've got to think about how I launch an attack. And it won't be, make cannabis legal. It will be, no, prove to the UK citizens that you guys have not got a conflict of interest. Because otherwise, how can you stand and watch people get arrested for getting a 10 bag because they're dealing with their arthritis? How can you do that? That's insane. And certainly when we look at the typical excuses like, but it can cause psychosis. Well, I'm not dismissing that, but what I will say is that the tobacco figures and the alcohol figures and every single figure under the sun far exceeds cannabis. Right. And yet we've got medical clinics that are using CBD to treat people with THC psychosis. You're not going to be able to do that with beer or caffeine or anything like that. It's just nice to see that the plant kind of has that ability to correct that issue in the human body. And the fact that that's being totally dismissed, I think is just... I mean, I've tried so hard not to swear during the entirety of this.
Oh, you're welcome to. We're an explicit podcast. He's Irish.
True.
So, keeping with the sort of semi-conspiratorial thought process, right? And this isn't too off the fucking rails, but I'm wondering, Like, you probably know this actually. Do we know how much money, or if there is money from the tobacco industry that is directly linked to the CBD vape industry, say for instance, somebody that isn't going to be punished for all of these things that are going to come in?
That's a good question.
The reason I ask is, right, the green revolution that we've been talking about obviously suggests a different economic application as a whole. Really, it does, because in order to sort of build up the infrastructure to actually get something that is efficient, say, in that regard, will require a serious amount of rethinking and restructuring. So, like, an awful lot of the fears that we hear about are like, oh, we're going to cripple current industries, like Simpa mentioned, like both of you mentioned, and, you know, people are going to be fucked. People are going to lose all their jobs and whatnot, right? But what if it's not us really that is dictating how that transition takes place? So bear with me here, right? If there's if there's so much, don't fucking put me off here. You know I lose my train of thought. If there's an awful lot of money being invested in things that are getting through the cracks, right? Then you could sort of surmise that those in those positions of power are in control of the transition into the application of the plant as a whole. And then once they get to a certain fucking point, then they go, oh yeah, you can grow at home. No bother. We're already 100 fucking steps ahead of you with all of the collection of the fucking information that we've gotten from potentially the police, potentially universities, wherever the fuck they're doing it. It just feels like that to me. And I mean, that you can label that as conspiratorial. I was really just off the top of my head, really.
It's kind of not, though, because if let's take Canada's legislation, for example. Previous to Canada legalizing cannabis, or the creation of Prohibition 2.0, to quote Jody Emery, they had 7 laws that governed cannabis. They then, once they signed legalization, had 45 laws. Some of those laws are so nuanced and screwed up around advertising. You can face prison for advertising of a leaf and wrong branding. As one seed is treated as 1 gram. Overpossession, if that's a term, but it's what I describe it as, is 30 grams in Canada. You walk down the street with 29 grams in your pocket, you're all right, that's fine. You walk it down the street with 31 grams and you've got other exacerbating circumstances, or even if you're cheeky at the cop, you can potentially face 5 years in federal prison for that.
What about if you get caught with 29 grams and 3 seeds?
Yeah,
it's still over. The Canadians built that on the Americans. So the Americans work on an equivalency. So state by state, it varies. Some of the states I went to, you're allowed to buy an ounce from a dispensary, or an edibles class. Some states break down to an eighth. All extracts are an eighth, or all edibles are an eighth. So you can have 8 products, and that makes your ounce. Some states then go on, actually, 1 gram of concentrate is 1 gram. They were good states. But it's weird sort of how they've broken it up. But again, it's all about controlling the market. You know what I mean? But they're doing it through very nefarious means, whereas the street has maintained a strong integral price for drugs for decades. Do you know what I mean? We don't go up with the banks and everything else. We don't go with the crashes of the economies. Drug prices stay solid because it's a worked out and established economy, and that economy is huge and powerful. They're trying to then create this and siphon the money from this, and it's never going to work. All you're doing is informing the people in the middle that these drugs are okay, and they're seeing the corporate money and going, I could pay this and do that and be legit, or we can just fund this. So this is booming. The illicit market, the unregulated market of all drugs is booming. Look at what's happening with mushrooms. Mushrooms are having a huge renaissance because the big pharmaceutical companies are trying to medicinalize and create therapies. And do you know what I mean? It's ironic that America are obviously the progenitors and the purveyors and main pushers of the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotics. The FDA in the past 2 years has approved a cocaine-based nasal spray called Numbrino. They've approved a ketamine-based drug called esketamine for Johnson & Johnson. They've improved Epidiolex as a cannabinoid-based medication. They've just given preliminary approval to MDMA for limited trials via MAPS. Do you know what I mean? The list is going to grow. LSD is about to join that. DMT will join that list next. But you know what? We will still go to prison for our possession of it. Literally, they are going to profitize and make it. It's the same reason why street weed is going off here. The other thing about Canada, they're creating a genetic library so that Canada says you're allowed only the strains that we have. We say this is the approved list of genetics, the same way we do with hemp farming. You've got like 13 of the European or whatever it is, and you're only allowed those genetics. It doesn't account for genetic drift. It doesn't account for cross-pollination. It doesn't account for any of the other variants that occur through intercycle breeding. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so the market's inevitably going to change. But then what they do is they can, in my conspiracy here, is as we grow our own in the community and research and do whatever else, they can still raid us through it being illegal or not. We haven't paid a license or we're not joined up to an organization, seize those genetics. They go off for research and development or whatever else. And they then suddenly end up as a cannabis-based medicinal product several years later.
See, going back to that stuff, is it all incinerated or isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, that's one question I feel really needs to be answered. But yeah, you know, there is far too much money in these companies now exploring the natural world. I mean, it's brilliant. Like, really, mushrooms. Yeah, all right then. I didn't see them possibly being good for depression, you know, let alone DMT. And I mean, ketamine. I mean, Christ, I just, it makes me shudder, that stuff. Yeah. But you know, each to their own. And if it has medicinal value, and it certainly isn't half of the single molecule crap that's normally thrown down our throat, then at least there is that kind of positive direction to embracing the natural world, I think.
Yeah, but it's an interesting thing. I don't know if you've seen Dr. Carl Hart is released his new book about sensible drug use for adults or whatever. It's adult drug use, I think it's called. And he brings up a relative point that is something that I've spoken on for many years. And it's something I advocate because I knew all of those things helped, because they've helped me. They've helped my friends. I've grown up in a druggy community because of being impoverished and whatever else. And the people that I live amongst we're the third most impoverished region in Northern Europe. I live in the worst part of that sector. Do you know what I mean? These are my kin. These are my folk, man. They've got fuck all, but you know what they have? They have each other. Northerners are hearty, we're resilient, and we have a wonderfully vibrant drug community culture. We really do, man. And within that, there is no racism, there is no sexism, there is no boundaries or borders, because people recognize their right and want to get high. Very few end up with dependency issues, and when they do, it's usually helped by the community. Do you know what I mean? It has that thing. So what would happen is people would then go to the people that, Dave's hitting the coke seriously bad every weekend at the minute. Go, do you want to come camping and go take some mushrooms with us? Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. And we titrate each other's experience, because again, we're all curious of drugs. And the more they try and create super powerful, patented products, that's a lot of P's, all that's going to happen is that they will then enter the so-called recreational market. Look what's happening with fentanyl and shit like that. Do you know what I mean? Then with carfentanil is we have to then worry about what they're doing to create their products and whatever else. They can then create their products and restrict ours, but all it's ever going to do is incentivize us to want the fucking thing. Do you know what I mean? These things already exist. According to World Health Organization statistics, and it's a really thing, the Global Drugs Report breaks this down wonderfully. So it talks about the rates of dependency within consumers. It says that globally, about 9% of cannabis consumers potentially could face dependency issues. 23% of heroin users, 17% of cocaine users, 38%, I think it is, of tobacco users. And I can't remember, alcohol somewhere in the 20s as well. But then when you look at illicit drugs versus legal drugs, and you see the dependency issues, and then when you correlate two other statistics, which is currently 5% of all global deaths are attributable to alcohol consumption. 1 in 20 people that die, it's attributable to alcohol consumption. When you get your head around, you really get your head around that, and you understand the damage that something like alcohol happens, but it's causes, but it's allowed to exist as it should be allowed to exist because it is a thing. If we were to then prohibit it, we saw what happened in America with the 18th Amendment. A lot of people died. And that's what's happening now with all of these other substances, even with cannabis, because we currently have street growers, big cartels and organized gangs that are spraying their crops with synthetic cannabinoids that are being developed in pharmaceutical laboratories. You've got to remember the first strain of spice was created by Pfizer back in 1974, something like that, as an attempt to start. They've been on this. You think Raphael Machiel was doing all what he was doing for the greater good? Where do you think all the research has gone? What do you think all of this is applied to? It's not to give us the plant back. He may appreciate the plant, but the direction that they're going in isn't to secure it for the rest of us.
Yeah, but maybe we need to hijack their direction and kind of stick it on the right track to, the common good. I don't think it's impossible. Certainly now, I mean, going back to Love Bud some time ago, me and my wife set it up just on the edge of 2015, going into 2016, and the general kind of reception from family and friends was like, start that wacky backy, But now most of them are completely converted. Like, they absolutely love CBD. They recognize the plant that it comes from, and that kind of stigma has been removed from a lot of people. And I think that is an absolute Brucey. The days of before Google, to now, where there's like the absolute kind of free access to information at your fingertips, and people are starting to realize that it's not reefer madness, and certainly there is that racial undertone to cannabis prohibition, and they can't sit happily on people's heads, as well as the likes of MPs having double standards, or potentially a PM as well. The world is awakening, and I do believe that these things are going to be taken seriously soon. And if the medicinal kind of industry is still about, at some point in dealing with cannabis, whatever, but as soon as we got access, right, there's going to be very few people going towards the medicinal angle. There's going to be very few people going for other kind of prescription drugs, and that will be a beautiful time.
I think we need to claw back, I suppose, the development of treatment programs for certain conditions. So I don't believe that we should be giving pharmaceutical companies the control of what cannabis product then goes into somebody with, say, anxiety. Because what they're going to do is they're going to take metadata studies, they're going to look for an outlier for majority, and that's the product they'll develop. So many people will fall outside of that product, but that will be their only legal route to get their treatment. At the minute, there's still quite a few of the clinics are prescribing flowers for anxiety and for other things. But as I say, call me a conspiracy theorist, but in a couple of years, I reckon I'm going to be fucking right. They are not going to be prescribing raw flower. There's nowhere in the legislation under the Misuse of Drugs Regulation 2001, it prohibits smoking, and there is no clause for vaporization. So
I think you might be right, because, going back to the full and broad spectrum kind of issue that's potentially facing the CBD market, I've seen posts in some of the Facebook groups where it's like, I've just got my prescription. And you feel really happy for the person. But of course, no one doesn't just go, oh, yeah. It's like, hold on, well, what's on that box? I want to see, indica, 17% THC, less than 1% CBD. All right, fair enough. That's interesting. But also, I noticed that you can get full spectrum oils on prescription. It's like, that's a shame, because there might be goodness coming out at the end of March, and there might be a full spectrum product that is able to get validated, but I think it'll be a struggle. And then, of course, it's back to the medicinal angle. And if anything, that then reinforces what I was saying earlier about, the industry going, you have CBD, we'll keep the other cannabinoids.
Mm-hmm. All right, so then here's an idea to pitch. Or a sort of conversation I suppose to have is, what if, to save psychosis and to save all of these other detrimental consequences of illicit street weed, the NHS was to grow all of the cannabis and create an adult consumption market, sell that, use the profit to finance the cultivation, production, and distribution of prescribed cannabis on an NHS prescription cost of £9, rather than hundreds of pounds through private clinics. So I think at some point a conversation needs to be had of going, okay, you've said cannabis has medicinal qualities. I prefer the term therapeutic, but we're going down medicinal for the sake of argument here. Then we should have an access point. You're saying that currently the only way is these private clinics. Why? Oh, because they're the only ones who can get around the current legislation. And no, why isn't the health service providing this? The government turns around and says it's the health service, it's the trust's fault. No, they've got no fucking education, because all of the information, everything that has come out in the past few years is private. It's within that private corporate world that's going to make a killing from the production of these products, rather than the proliferation of the education information that allows the informed consumer. What I would then envision in that is your doctor, you go to him and you get a cultivar and you go, oh, that was mint. And they go, all right, we can actually get you some seeds of that. And you get the same thing and you can grow it at home. Because that model wouldn't be incentivized about making a cash cow out of patients and a continuation of profiting from them. What you would then do is actually be able to create themselves sufficient and get gone. So ideally, that system would then move to have that private arm that then is providing the best pharmaceutical grade cannabis as an adult consumption product, because that's the best way to limit the harm. That's the best way to control it, is it not? And then that way, for every joint we smoke, I'm saving a granny who's just had a stroke. That geezer who's getting dialysis is off this bucket. You know what I mean? It's that we could be doing.
Yeah, we could be doing that. But I mean, if you think about what happened in the election debates with Labour bringing forward like the whole redacted privatization document of the NHS and the intentions that were there.
Corbyn published, yeah.
Yeah. And it was, there's your incentive right there. I mean, if your incentive is to privatize the NHS and sell it off to the states or the highest bidder or whatever, then why would you give it something like cannabis that it could draw, it could almost self-fund from? Why would you do that?
Yeah.
That's a difficult question.
It kind of loops us back down to this freedom of information request, and perhaps these individuals have some of the vested interests beyond that of the public, because we know that, there is a thing of the post-economic recovery committee is sort of, they need to be looking at the full ubiquitous relegalization of cannabis for all industries. Farming decimated, definitely. Fisheries decimated, agriculture decimated. We have got men that work, men and women that want to work. We have vast infrastructure. We have all of this expertise, this skill. We need an industry. There is no other option at this point. Beautifully, we don't have to rely on getting trade deals, because everything we grow here would benefit us here. And as long as we don't allow corporate elites to have their fucking bank accounts in the Caymans and whatever, and they just siphon the profit and pay themselves with bonuses. If we build the infrastructure, so yes, there's profit, but the majority of that profit first and foremost benefits the community through tax incentive models and through payback schemes, and especially through social equity programs. I've got too many friends in prison, too many people whose mental health has been destroyed and lives ruined by the idea that the police can attack them and steal them and lock them in a cage at any time. These people need recompense, and we need it first and foremost. Once we've dealt with the sick, we have to go to those whose lives have been destroyed by this war. Then you can start talking about, well, I didn't get enough money for my second yacht this year. Fuck those guys. No, they shouldn't be leading this industry. They know business. They know how to make money, but they don't have the anecdotal evidence, the lived experience. They don't have a knowledge of our community or our culture. They don't know what it's been like to fight against this for so long. They don't understand what it is to be the wrong side of the law.
Yeah, but that's only by perception, isn't it? Considering what Seed Our Future has found out, is there actual proof, that cannabis is a Schedule 1 drug? And if there is no proof, then how can it be a Schedule 1? What I found interesting in their FOIs was that the Home Office said that half of the information had been burnt and the other half had been sent to the National Archives. And it's like, well, no, you guys should have that information. You can't maintain a legal status and just go, oh yeah, we misplaced the ciggy packet that we wrote on the back of. That just does not compute to me. And that really kind of then puts the onus on them, doesn't it? Okay, if there's no proof, then how do we justify this? And I do think we're coming to the end of the war, gents. Whether it turns away that you yourself, Simpa, have kind of suggested. The end of the war is the beginning of the new battle, isn't it? At the end of the day, are we going to go for legalization or decriminalization? Both have different implications. Is there going to be the potential to grow at home, or are you going to have to form a cooperative and grow in one area? Or is it going to come to a point of, synthetic cannabinoids being the only bits and pieces available? I mean, with new horizons come scary kind of dawns, as it were. And certainly I think that's the same with pretty much every aspect of the cannabis industry. You mentioned farming earlier. I personally believe that if Kit Malthouse's suggestions and even the business, energy and industry strategies recommendations were to come into play, well, it'll affect them first, because they're going to have to then start looking for cultivars that don't produce the 6 variables of CBN or the 5 variables of THC delta or delta 8 for that fact. They're going to have to find all these strains where they're hardly produced, and then of course they're going to have to be able to get it tested in a lab to verify that it's hot, but to the resolution of potentially 4 zeros and a 1. That is where it kind of hurts. But if you get that kind of structure in, then you can get past that. And if that's looking at the worst side, isn't it? Looking at the best side, if we can get that infrastructure in, like you said, then those bits and pieces can change. But it's really worrying when it comes to that Kit Malthouse kind of suggestion and BEIS. Is it going to go the way of big companies? Or is there going to be a fight back and say, we're not following your laws until you explain it?
Yeah, I think you're several good points with that. The thing with the Home Office, what I'm trying to remind myself of and learn more and more to be patient with an understanding of the psychology and nuance of other people. So I often espouse the idea that if I was born you, raised you, lived your life, had your experiences, I'd be sat there as you. I would speak as you, I would think as you, I would act as you. There'd be no different. So that to me suggests there is only one consciousness that pervades it all, and it is only our experiences that determine the outcomes. Obviously, we have some minor amount of free will chucked in there. But then think of it this way. That document was signed in 71, came into action in 73. Most of the people that were around there are dead. Most of the people that are now in those offices are people that have just grown up with the lie and the limited blinkers. They've never seen an emerging drug culture. They've never heard of the history of medical application. All they've ever seen is headlines, smackhead this, crackhead that, huge cannabis farm, child slavery. They only see that limited thing of it. So those people are in that position and they rise within that community and go and do their greater good because everyone is the protagonist of their own narrative. We're all the hero in our own story. Do you know what I mean? In our own head, that's the way the ego works to talk us into that situation. They don't have a fucking clue what to do, frankly. They don't know themselves. You're coming across and they're going, we don't know. We've never considered this. They're bouncing it to somebody else. Going, we don't fucking know. So they're literally going, how do we stop them asking the questions? Because they don't have anybody to ask. Think about it. Same in government. They've been telling that lie long enough that it's become the truth. What is it? Joseph Goebbels said, tell a lie, make it big enough or repeat it often, and it becomes truth. That's where we are with drugs. Why is cannabis illegal? Because it's a scheduled drug. Why is it scheduled? Because it's illegal. That is the stance of the PPS, the prosecution service in Northern Ireland at the minute. So the prosecution there have gone back and forth with a defendant over a CBD raid of saying that they need to provide evidence for the scheduling. The prosecution have come back and said the evidence is in the charge. The fact that it's illegal is the evidence for it being illegal. It's the same thing because they don't know what to do. So they're sat in an office somewhere going, the fuck do we do? It's illegal. Why is it illegal? Because it's illegal. That in their head, it's like a cognitive bias or dissonance. They can't see beyond it because they don't understand. And what's that quote? Thingy Upton, a man can't understand something if his salary is dependent upon him not understanding it. Do you know what I mean? These people they're not put in a position to hear us and go, oh, you're fucking right. There's a few people in this land that are, and that's actually judges. Most judges have never thought of this, never heard of this, because every defendant comes across them. They've been tricked by the Crown Prosecution Service or their legal representation to plead down and admit guilt. Admit guilt to what? We're now finding that the act itself is fraudulent. If you go back, as you said, through Cedar Futures evidence, it's entirely based on racist rhetoric. There is no science. All of it that was compounded to create that act was pre the discovery of the fucking endocannabinoid system. Was before we even knew what the hell just after, but not when it was globally sort of known. I think it was 64 we discovered the cannabinoid system and THC came No, it was 64 we discovered THC. It was 1990s we discovered the endocannabinoid system. So, you know what I mean? All of these discoveries, and then you've got that's just stuff that was in the public arena. Imagine what's happened in the past 30 years in private. That information needs protecting. So when you're saying it's not in the public interest, same reason why we're not going to get anywhere with this. It's not in their interest for us to know what they know.
And that's where we have to change their mind.
There must be, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, how is the requirement on their side to prove their point of view, they're enforcing or whatever? If you lose the physical proof, surely automatically that becomes null and void. It becomes unenforceable, right? In any sort of like fairly written system. But unfortunately, it really feels like it's not a fairly written system at all.
Oh. It kind of comes to one question, I think, right? Is there morality in law? All right. Now, this is an interesting thought. I mean, my mother's got legal kind of experience, and it was just a random thought that I had about 4 or 5 months ago, and basically asked her, and to which she was like, "Oh, big question, Kevin. Well, I think I got well done some points there, but it's quite interesting in that we look at what we're told is illegal, and we can shoot it down, right? And yet they are so out of touch, or as you said, blinkered to the point that it's like, well, I can't see you, so you can't see me, so we'll just leave it as it is. And that's an interesting mentality. But yeah, it is. It's one of those things that just can't last forever. I mean, we're all reasonable people, and if we've all got a reasonable love and a reasonable kind of justification for that love, how long can the ostrich have its head in the sand? I don't think it's an indefinite thing.
Yeah, I think that luckily between for them anyway, luckily between Brexit and COVID, this is very low on their priority. As you say, because they're sort of blinkered to it, they can't understand how many lives a day are getting ruined by this. The consequences on the mental state of the millions of people who are consumers. We're on a spectrum of anxiety as a consumer, and every day it varies. Some days you see that blue light and your body just goes, ugh, and you get pained. And every prison movie you ever saw, every story you ever heard, every wild dream you ever had fucking rushes to you in a fight or flight panic moment. We've all got a form of like cultural PTSD from the war on drugs, the damage that is inflicted on us daily, the violence, the mental violence that is inflicted on us by the state because of their perpetuation of this paradigm, their inability to accept that we need to review this shit. That's my one push at the minute is if we can get anything, that we need somebody in Parliament to call for a review into the Misuse of Drugs Act. Because it doesn't stand. The language in it doesn't make any fucking sense. It talks about like smoking opium. Like people don't smoke opium anymore. People will smoke up heroin. We've got various other sort of things like with fentanyl and other opioids, especially prescription opioids, meaning there's a lot more diversity of product than was ever written into the act. So the things they're policing are not even covered in it. It's just covered in the generalized term of opioid or cannabinoid, or do you know what I mean? They deliberately wrote it so ambiguous so that they could ring fence and keep all of it. And then as we've learned all of this shit that blows the sides off this, they're unwilling to have that conversation. You just get back that little copy and paste, as you say, the government has no intentions to reclassify. This is a dangerous drug with a propensity for addiction, blah, blah, blah. It's
horseshit.
I take it back slightly there. Like, when it comes to PTSD in the industry, I've got to say that was for me just turning into the noughties when the first time I heard someone say, "Oh, it's 5 1/8 now, mate." It's like, what? How the hell are you sticking an extra $5 on this? You outrageous!
Yeah, we had a moment in the north. We used to call them Swifties. Swifty 750 would be what it would be. It'll be a 16th. And that was always £7.50. So, you know what I mean? When we were young, you'd get 4 or 5 years together, be like, oh, should we get Swifty? We are what you got. And you literally get your pocket change. And you get a nice chunk of fucking soap bar, and you'd all chip in, and you'd make a lung or a bucket or something, and you'd all go round. It'd be pocket change. It was nothing, but it'd give you a full day of activities. Do you know what I mean? For such a price. And then literally overnight, the soap bar market's changed drastically because of obviously the green cannabis flower market really increasing in the illicit market. It doubled overnight. The cost of it just went boom. And people was like, it's not even a Swifty anymore. Just on the fact they couldn't call it a Swifty, most of my mates went, I'm going to smoke green. I may as well.
I was
20 years ago.
Kind of my history with cannabis is a little bit kind of slightly off the beaten track. I actually come across cannabis as a result of playing the bagpipes from the age of 11. I mean, they use hemp thread in there to keep the fuckers from staying going, and basically it wasn't until 15 when I basically turned around to my brother and said, what's that? Is that drug stuff? Like, as he was making a spliff in the phone box, and I was like, no, do you know what, I'll smoke this now and show you there's nothing to it. Got a little bit of a tingling, but I didn't kind of really get onto it. But then I went to Germany. My dad's in the forces, and I ended up embracing hip hop culture out there, like, and kind of seeing what you were saying earlier, like, cannabis being literally multicultural, all embracing. You go to a hip hop jam, you'd be there with the breakers, like, you'd see techno heads, just around the corner, just still enjoying themselves, like, but they're kind of like go back to the kind of, I think I lost my thread. It's been a long time.
All right, I do it all the time, man. I do it all the time. Where were you in Germany?
I was living in Gütersloh.
I don't know where that is.
Near Bielefeld, about 30 miles away from the Dutch border. I used to literally, that's where I was going.
There you go.
Teats. Oh, yeah. See, now I got to a point of running around, going back and forth, Holland and Germany, going to nightclubs, selling. It was around about 96 when White Widow was Cannabis Cup winner for Best Effect Grass. And that was one of my big kind of selling points. But I had to come back to the UK, and I went through Amsterdam. I picked up a half ounce of hydrochronic and a quarter of White Widow. Got to Cardiff, where I was meeting up with my brother, and that kind of disappeared quite quickly. As you can imagine, I had quite a few friends when I had that. But then, like, I literally turned around to my brother and it's like, we've run out. Can you get anything? And he's like, yeah, sure, give us a tenner, I'll be back in a bit. And he's come back, he's slapped down this little stick and 10 Lambert and Butler and a little bit of change. And I'm just like, what the fuck is that? Like, and then it was just like, one of the things that I was told in Holland is that Britain was a shitty, insignificant island where you could sell shit for top dollar. Right. And he said that because I walked into the back room of his coffee shop and he's got a load of 9 bars there. And it's like, oh, I've seen them in the UK. And he's like, these ones aren't like the ones you get in the UK, mate. to which I learned rather quickly that he wasn't talking poo. And, where you're saying like all of a sudden there was that change from solid to weed. I think that was roughly about 2001, wasn't it? When they reclassified cannabis in Lambeth Council. And I was actually squatting in Brixton at the time, which was absolutely madness because you had the Brockwell Park reclaimed Brockwell Park Cannabis Festival. You had Reclaim the Streets a couple of years before, and literally everyone was just, Brixton High Street, pulling in fat doobs, literally like blazing up, and there's coppers, and it'd be like an unspoken conversation. It's like, you're not arresting me for this. With this copper going like, I would like to be arresting you for that, but I've been told I can't. I think that was actually the time where all of a sudden weed became more in the mainstream because, it gave Britain the chance to kind of have a little look about, build up a little bit of an infrastructure, and certainly all of a sudden then you've got shed loads of people smoking weed, and it's like, hold on, where's the Tesco's written 9 bars that we all used to kind of joke about with that Goldie looking chain song?
it's still kicking around sort of your council estates and your poorer areas, because it's still a commodity and it still makes money. You know what I mean? It's still something that on a smaller scale a person can acquire their own consumption and sell it and make a margin on. Whereas the cannabis flower market fluctuates region to region with the postcode lottery. So the prices vary. In some places, you're talking $2.50 for an ounce. So therefore, your margins in terms of what you can turn it into, if you're then going, I'll buy this for my own consumption, sell to 2 mates, and that covers me, kind of goes out of the window. What you're saying, I came with a thought there, is you're saying there is then a correlation, is there not, between GW Pharma coming into existence, 1998, GW Pharma getting a license, 2001 misuse of drug regulation allowing for the production of Schedule 1 drugs into medications. I think we could track these on two. There is a correlation there. It is interesting. I've never thought of it that way, but yeah, it is interesting.
That's it. You say that the pharma companies are the enemy. No, I believe it's the middleman. It is the Home Office. You know, they have literally, disregarded the fact that it's a food, disregarded the fact that animals, as well as furry friends, we all have an endocannabinoid system, and they've disregarded the fact that, we could clean up the planet and certainly absorb a shed load of the CO2 in the environment if it was allowed. But
I think it's a bit, unfortunately, my head's going, it's a bit more sinister than that. If you look at, say, if they're lost Section 23, if they're lost, we suspect you have drugs, we can search you. If they lose that power, that harms the state massively, because it means their bully boys in uniform can't just go, I smell cannabis, let's search whoever the fuck we want. Oh, I'm still here. Let's search whoever the hell we want, you know what I mean? And run a rampage, and all they have to do to get out of any interaction is suspected of possession of drugs. And that can get them out of some abhorrent behavior and actions. So I think that losing that power would be huge for them. That would then lead to a cascading event where we would then look at, was it the 2001 Terrorism Act? And we would have to then go, what the fuck is in this? And then that would lead to a cascade of us then going, what the hell's in these COVID regulations? It all unravels. Once they give us permission for us to live like we're not prisoners, for the tens of millions of people that consume drugs every day, or not every day, but on whatever basis they choose, but do so without endangering or harming themselves, or without a dependency issue, or without being a criminal per se, then we're going to have this real problem with that juxtaposition. Because if you suddenly liberate these people, imagine the creativity, the ability. All of the people that I know that are quiet smokers, the hundreds of people that have come up to me in the past few years and gone, I love what you're doing. I'd love to like the page, but I follow your stuff, but I can't put a like on it. My work follows us or whatever. When those people are free and welcomed back into society, that's going to redress the balance. And when you suddenly can't threaten them because of the way they smell, that's the ultimate danger for them, is the loss of control. And again, that's probably quite conspiratorial, but if you think of it in that sense, especially in certain communities, how entrenched stop and search is, say, in central London, and the communities that it's targeting, if they suddenly lost that capability, it with those communities, and especially if those communities were then allowed to grow, cultivate, and profit from cannabis, that's scary to the establishment. That's scary. To the people, that's good. That's progress. That's development. Because where's all the money that's going to be created in their communities? Spent in their fucking communities. They're going to be paying their council tax. They're going to be supporting other ventures. They're going to actually be weeding out the criminal element, not enforcing it. And that again is scary, because if the police can't then say all these people in these areas are criminals because of drugs, and then we can actually keep the money from drugs, and instead of having to hide it, and like I've got mates that piss money up the wall that in a summer will go, I'm going to buy a fucking jet ski, piss around with it for a couple of months and sell it on, just because they can't have the cash. They can't have the money they have. It can't go anywhere. They don't ever want to be caught with it. It's easier to then have an asset and keep the asset somewhere else and then trade in, you know what I mean? Whereas if they could be legitimized, all of that money, it would be spent back in the goddamn community. It would be put in banks. It could be put in ISAs and saving bonds and everything else to help fund things that actually matter to people, give us longevity of financial freedom.
Yeah, you have to have the want. I've said that many a times, right? Like, it's a scary process to have easy levels of entry in that fashion, like you've said. Like, oh, I've smelled something that covers me to a certain extent, right? Mm-hmm. But this is why, you know, I support the term, say, defund the police and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously, if you look at that beyond the surface level, what it really means is, well, actually, we need to restructure the way that the fucking police works. We need to reinforce the community and support groups that are around everywhere else, and then see where we are at that point. So here's a new slogan that isn't as catchy. So, refund the police post-prohibition. How about that? Restructure and refund.
Restructure, yeah.
It's the John Ehrlichman quote, you know, the Nixon advisor. And we're saying very famous quote, and he was Nixon's advisor on drugs. And he said in an interview in, I think it was like in the 90s, something like that, that he said, we knew the war on drugs was bullshit. Or I'm paraphrasing there, the war on drugs was bullshit. But what it gave us the power to do was, if we associated cocaine with the blacks and marijuana with the hippies, we could vilify them on the evening news. We could demonize them, break up their meetings, and basically stop them organizing. Do you know what I mean? It was a way to disempower those communities. Think of the movements that were alive in the 70s. Think of the union movements. Think of the left movements. Think of the rights movements that were kicking off at the time. You know, I mean, most of them had an association, as we've just said, about the diversity of cannabis consumers. If you then smoke weed, you're acceptant of other cultures. It opens your mind to the idea of, you might be wrong about some shit, and then you want to go ask somebody about it that's actually got the lived experience. It broadens your horizon, and you're both better people for it. And I think that again, exactly that's why, in my opinion, that would be why, because that you target that, you can tear everything else apart. And we've seen the consequence of that since. So I made the point on a radio show when I was debating this absolute draconian prohibitionist guy. And he was saying about the drug users drug using males leave women to raise kids. And I was like, no. People get caught with drugs, go to fucking prison, and that child is brought up fatherless. The damage that then causes to a generation, you ruin at least 3 lives by the action of taking somebody off the street for a little bit of weed, or even a little bit of any drug at that point, any of these offenses. Do you know what I mean? If we target it like that, you destroy communities. So exactly that empowers them the opportunity to ensure that the next generation of males will never be able to rise to challenge that. They won't have the security of hereditary. They won't be able to pass down assets. They won't be able to secure wealth. There wouldn't be a point of class transition. I'm obviously very shit hot on this, and always will be, about the war on drugs is classist. It's entirely classist, because look at the MPs and Michael Gove that have come out going, oh, we sniff a bit of coke and that. Still in the job. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. The fact the Sun found methamphetamine, found cocaine and all sorts of drugs at the Home Office and in the toilets of Parliament with 2 independent investigations, and people just went, that's normal. You've got the Wolf of fucking Wall Street, right? Picture. So you got the Wolf of Wall Street over here, New Jack City. If you've seen those 2 movies, that is cocaine. But look at the 2 fucking worlds. That guy's on a pedestal, ruling the fucking world. All these people want to emulate him based off the back of that movie. Look at what New Jack City did in the depiction of inner city crack consumption. That is entirely perception created by the establishment. The drug is neutral. It is the way we consume it. The set and the setting, and especially the dependence arises when this thing becomes useful to us, seriously useful. If your life is shit and you have fuck all because of your lack of economic advantages, the world you've been born into, and your lack of class mobility, you find a substance that makes you feel like the Wolf of Wall Street guy, but you can only live to the New Jack City. You're going to come New Jack City, and then the world's going to kill you in trying to, not kill you, but try and come after you for it, encage you, destroy your family, tear apart the business that you've developed. We're putting guys on the cover of Forbes that are becoming billionaires for selling cannabis. While we're still raiding these farms, we're still taking medical growers to jail. We're still taking people that are just smoking a little bit, selling the odd ounce. They're still getting prison sentences. We're still destroying lives. That hypocrisy needs addressing.
Definitely. And my apologies if you're hearing slurping there. That is my puppy who decides that when he wants to drink, he needs to drink a whole bloody river. I'm slightly off-putting, but bless him. He's a wonderful pooch. Do you know what? It is, I think, classist. I think it's definitely a social form of warfare. But we've been at that point that you mentioned before, where it was beneficial for communities, and I do think that we'll get there again. I mean, I live in southwest Devon, and this actually used to be known as the Hemp West Coast. Most of the towns around here had ports had hemp fields surrounding them to ensure that they could make sure enough replacement canvas and ropes for any ships that were docked there. And of course, all that money there would have been, I believe back those days, a law that says if you don't grow hemp, then you're in the poo. But at the end of the day, there still would have been money to be made from that would have ultimately been plowed into those communities. And, that is exactly what really needs to be done. The people who have been arrested, who are master growers, they should be the guys working in GW Pharma, not some bloody guy who's gone to Cambridge and learned his trade through analysing cells of dandelions or whatever. The people with the true experience. And you're right, the people who've been arrested. I mean, I myself, I'd like to say that I was always polite to the police officers, even when they had silly names, not mentioning anyone PC Angus. But at the end of the day, it can and it will change. I have utmost confidence in that. At the end of the day, we will get to that point of communities being able to kind of contribute, like we see in America, where unfortunately they're still unable to put, or at least I think they're still unable to put, marijuana tax money into the bank. So, they're helping to pay schools with cold hard cash. I mean, either way, whatever happens, if that is a reality again, then I think we're going the right direction.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the only issue I have is that the corporate takeover and the wave of the capitalizing, especially the cannibalistic machinations of the corporate elite, is to didn't think of that. Is to eat each other up. The big fish eats the little fish until there's a couple of fish left. And that's what they're going to do that side. What I want to ensure is that we have a community thing that thrives. We don't want them to asset strip, create all the patents, have all the drive, all the technology, get all of the infrastructure of it away from us, and then go, you can have what's left. And we get to go, yeah, we can trade in the plant and whatever, which will be nice, and we'll have a bit of cash flow. But they'll own the patents, they'll own the licenses, they'll create an infrastructure that just continues to perpetuate that divide. So yeah, we may get better off, but they'll get well the fuck off. Do you know what I mean? It's trickle down economics. And unless we're the ones that control that infrastructure, because they're going to get bored. These venture capitalists are going to get bored. Eventually they'll go on to the next thing, and then in the next thing. It's crypto. Once we get true quantum computing, that's when we truly figure out what the hell happens, and then we get to that through the gateway of cannabis. That's one of the only ways we can get.
Who would have thought cannabis graphene would outperform all those other synthetics or whatnot? Yeah. I mean, the plant just continues to amaze, and yeah, if that's the case, there's going to be a trade-off, isn't there? There's still going to be those in power who are getting money in some kind of way, but if we're still left with the potential to grow the plant, I mean, they could try and give us standard seeds and the likes of, but or seeds that are programmed to a point that fit in whatever drug legislation is next, but with EU approved hemp strain seeds, if you plant them, right, and you grow them and you harvest the seed off them, you got to use them straight away, right? Because that's what they say, because at the end of the day, genetics has a way of reverting back, and that plant that's been tampered with to a point to make it complicit with the EU approved hemp strain will fight back. And if they turn around to us and say, you can have anything you want, as long as you don't touch Jack Herer, because apparently Bedrockin have stolen that one. As what you were saying earlier about misappropriate or reappropriating strains, well, what point can they not guarantee that we're ultimately going to take what we got and be able to breed it to a Jack Herer lookalike?
Well, yeah, but this is why exactly I think the packaging doesn't give us the profile, where they don't want us to know what we're getting. But then, so I think there's an argument to be made of, we have laws around on labeling around nuts, for example, right? You cannot produce a food product without then declaring if it's got nuts in or not to meet market regulations. So then we need to apply those regulations to medical cannabis so that they have to detail what the hell is on it. I went to one of the best dispensaries I was really impressed with was in Oregon. And Oregon regulations mean that you have to get on the label that's printed out the nutrients that we used. The nutrients, right? You say, and then you get a breakdown of the profile. So you get cannabinoids and terpenes. You haven't put flavonoids on it. Flavonoids that are cannabinoids. Cannabis-based, sorry. I can't remember how you amalgamate that word, but it's how you pronounce it, sorry. But yeah, they put that on the side. So then, as an informed consumer, you can then go and look at other seed profiles and then get that genetics. So you can literally go out, see the thing, try it and go, oh yeah, that only cost you $10 or whatever for it. You can then go and buy the seed for 20, 30, 50, whatever, plant at home and have that perpetual cycle, create a mother and whatever. And you've only had to pay those 2 points to it. And you become self-sufficient.
Beautiful time it would be. Beautiful time. The Venezuelan model was the best. Now, apparently, they still do have an element of a black market, but the vast majority of it is brought from pharmacies. I think it's like £1.70 a gram or something like that. That'd be nice over here, wouldn't it? But and you can only buy a certain amount of it, a month, which kind of it doesn't say much to me. You would like to grab a bag every night, get some blunt skins and all of that. But it does seem a little bit more controlled. And what you said just then with Oregon, that sounds absolutely awesome. But what other regulations do they have? Hold on. Isn't Oregon the one who's just decriminalized everything?
Yeah, some quite low rates for what it is. Some of them are actually sub-dose. Do you know what I mean? So they've decriminalized, but if you had what you would consider a recreational dose, is some of the things is higher than the decriminalization. So it's a good gesture, but I think what they've done is, again, it's misinformed individuals have then drawn, because they're not pooling from the people who lived experience. These are obviously from the harm reduction community that have rallied to get this. So I'm glad that a good chunk of the harm reduction globally, the harm reduction community, are fighting back against addiction as a disease and are fighting back against the idea of full abstinent-based recovery, understanding that there can be controlled, sensible use. You don't have to give up and stay abstinent of your drug for life to be recovered. Do you know what I mean? And as that develops more into it, the laws, I think, will reflect that. But yeah, currently at the minute, it's a bit funny. There was 2 things that went through. The other one was measure. No, it's just a jumble of numbers in my head. It's on one of the blogs that I've put up on the simplelife.com. But they passed another measure that said that within 2 years, they were going to build a framework to have psilocybin therapy. But they allowed a caveat into that basically said that until then, there is no infrastructure. So people can do their own sort of ceremonies, the social consumption of psilocybin is what I'm saying. So they're starting to move forward. I did see on Instagram recently, actually, New Jersey Weed Man is a very influential activist in New Jersey. He runs a weed shop there, and because they've changed the rules again around how they're going to criminalize it. It's still criminalized, but they've put it down to like the minimum absolute measure. And they're looking to shop mushrooms now. So you can see that the development, basically what we saw around the head shops in the UK when cannabis went from B to C, and we saw the ubiquity of people selling wet mushrooms to get around then the dry law that came in 2005. And then obviously we lost mushrooms when Theresa May, conflict of interest May, signed the 2017 novel psychoactive bill.
Yeah, it was a bit of a mixed bag of emotions, that for me. I've got to be honest, I was still enjoying them. when they were about there. I believe it was as a result of a shop in Guildford called East West, where the police effectively argued that even if they were in a tub and actually not growing, they were still prepared. And that's where the kind of line got drew, and that went through the Parliament, and they kind of basically agreed on that. Which is a shame because, I mean, you know, Christ, nowhere else or time was I able to get Ecuadorian or Hawaiian or Colombian. Or even the Thai pink buffalo that I tried to grow. Whereas, unfortunately, out of the 29 grams that I got was quite paltry in regards to the 500 grams I was hoping for. But, you know, that's it is nice that these things are kind of really being recognized. I mean, yeah, you can. The more you think about it, see that mushrooms is good for more than just kind of playing a Sega Mega Drive on a black and white TV with your mates and all agreeing that you can actually see the colors.
Well, it's the other side of it again is that even the way we're discussing it now is still with a lot of the cannabis community discussing cannabis, drug. Mycelium is a fucking utility. So if we talk bamboo, mycelium, and cannabis, we can smash everything. You got companies like IKEA and that are looking at, we're just going to grow packaging. Do you know what I mean? Because the nature of it, the way we can manipulate it, the amount of energy. I mean, look what happened so here's a funny anecdote. There's two brothers that run a farm in Amsterdam that were the number one sellers of mushrooms out there, right? So the Dutch Parliament, after, I think it was it was attributed that some girl jumped off a building after buying mushrooms. So the Dutch Parliament called a committee and they went, right, you're going to ban you from selling mushrooms, from psilocybin-containing mushrooms, but they left a caveat that basically allowed a black market for truffles to exist, right? A grey area for truffles. So the farmers figured out, right, actually, if we turn down the temperature, they managed to cut their costs, right? Turn down the temperature, causes the mycelium clusters inside to create truffles rather than to sprout, to create the sex organs of mushrooms. Still created a potency of psilocybin. They became dominant in the market and saved millions on farming costs. But as a consequence, again, it's not integration, because then what are they doing with waste product? So this is why we need vertical integration if we're going to have this. So again, if you're then look at what Pleasant Lands, that project is coming out with Voltface and all that shit. So what they're trying to do is change the THC laws in the UK so they can cultivate and produce here. There isn't a part of that. What are you going to do with the fibers? Are you going to integrate everything, or are you going to go as in America, if you have a license to extract flowers, you can't have a license to produce industrial materials. So you have to waste the roots and the fiber and the material and the fibrous material.
See, that's just insane. I talked to many farmers, you know, about the potential of having an adventure in growing hemp, because you can, dependent on what you're growing for, ultimately end up with 6 crops per harvest. You know, if you're growing in the right kind of way, but at the same time, like there's no kind of regulation over here. I mean, admittedly, if you're growing for flower, you're legally then growing for seed over here, you're not getting THC, but you still got quite a few parts of the plant. And if it ever gets to a point where it's one or the other, I think that's just stupid, because
it kind of already is. I mean, if you look at what happened with hempen. So hempen got their license under, or is allegedly under different pretense for what they were then using it. Allegedly, they were then extracting the crop into oils, and then that wasn't what their license was for. And so that is already then in play in the UK. You can get a low THC cultivation license, but it's only for sticks and stems.
Absolutely,
it's not. You have to legally destroy the flower. But we also know that there was a really good study in Canada a few years ago. That they'd extrapolated metadata from various other studies and found that on average a stalk will still hold up to maximum 9% cannabinoids. You can still extrapolate cannabinoids from
Rum Diaries. Hunter S. Thompson, he used to put all the stems in rum, like shitload of them, and leave it there, and it would extract it and then neck it.
Yeah, because the alcohol is a solvent, so yeah, we would extrapolate whatever's left, exactly. But also the stalks, when left to mature, the cannabinoids on them will obviously turn into their oxidized versions. So if it's got THC on it, it'll turn into a nice good old CBN. So then you mix some of that with alcohol, you know what I mean? You can see why it would be quite appealing. And I think there's a vast chunk of the industry. If you look at drinks like Live Well was a brand launched by Canopy Growth recently. You've got Molson Coors to make Coors Fosters, and many of those are the big brands. They're investing billions. You've got the guys that own Budweiser. They've chucked a few billion in, and they're all kind of banking on, in my opinion, that they've already got the infrastructure. If they can just swap out or be allowed to add drinkable alcohol, they've got everything they need. They already have the distribution. They have everything they need.
Does the CBD beer produce in the UK?
Is that Canabrew?
I think so. Don't know.
High Flyer? Oh, sorry, Green Times Brewing.
Hey, that rings a bell. This
very, very nice. And if this part goes out, Carl, you're welcome for the shout out, mate. But yeah, well, very, very, very nice. So, the thing is with that, gents, I'm going to have to call it in seconds few.
I'm actually dying for a piss. For the last 40 minutes, I swear.
Okay, I'll just leave on this one then, yeah. Hemp and hops diverged as species, separate species about 100,000 years ago. When the novel food situation kicked off, one of the very first food items discovered that was in existence before 1997 was in fact a German beer from 1996 where they used hemp in the brewing process. Now there's no reason to believe that you couldn't just supplement them in ratios to either kind of bring out terpene profiles or whatnot, and then considering the brewing temperature process, does it get hot enough to kill cannabinoids? I don't think it does. And also, I know that there's a company in America that create a product exclusively from a strain of hops that produces CBD to a point where they can create a 20% product from I think, cold press. I mean, that's insane. But they're so kind of tightly woven together, you've got to ask, has beer technically had a cannabinoid content in it all of this time? It's just that no one's ever actually tested it for that.
Interesting.
I mean, it all sort of belongs to the Cannabis family, as we say, and the fossil evidence that we've got from that was a study published that said that cannabis's roots back through all of this, and it divulged into a lot of foods as well that then converted into things that are also in our diet, and there are cannabinoids in a lot of other plants. That this is 28 million years old. Do you know what I mean? This has evolved with us synergistically as beings, and we've consumed its offspring, as it were, and we are so synergistically wrapped up in it. And the fact that it's been removed for the past 100 years, I think, is evident of why we're in a position globally, physically and socially that we are, because of its absence.
Without a doubt, I think on that basis, it's time to free the weed.
Hey.
Perfect way to end this. Well, it has been a pleasure.
Likewise.
Guys, you can keep up with Cefyn Jones at the Hemp Hound Agency. We will put links below. Also, check out the work of Lovebud. Thank you as always for watching, guys. If you made it all the way through, I'm sure you people love us. So do check us out on Patreon, where you can chuck us a little bit of coin, help us keep the lights on at this place. You can check us out at all social media platforms at Simpa Life. I've been Simpa, he's been Maga, and this wonderful gentleman's been Cefyn Jones.
Thank you very much.
Peace. Bye.